Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daryl Urbanski, your host as always. And today we are joined by returning guest Matthew Ehret, a multifaceted journalist, artist, and senior fellow at the American University in Moscow. As the driving force behind the Canadian Patriot Review, Matthew's voice resonates in the world of geopolitics. His literary contributions include two 4-volume series. The first is The Untold History of Canada, and the other, Clash of the Two Americas. Beyond writing, he's a co-founder and vice president of the Rising Tide Foundation, promoting education and intercultural dialogue. Matthew's expertise isn't just confined to the written word, he's also a talented illustrator and storyboard artist. With a passion for history, geopolitics, and the arts, Matthew's insights are both profound and enlightening. I always tell him how he speaks in historical citations. I love our conversations. And today I've asked him to come back on the show to help explain more on his insights into the world and where the world is headed. So Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Hey Daryl, I'm doing very well, thank you, and thank you for that very generous, eloquent introduction. I almost feel like I don't deserve it, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's an honor and a pleasure. And like I said, I really do enjoy our conversations. And again, I've gone through some of your stuff that, that's how I first discovered you. And part of why I reached out was just I mean, clearly it's your passion. Clearly you're very knowledgeable. And I could even fact check the things that you said. And that was something that I really valued because I hope I question everything. I know I get fooled and every now and then, but I just love it so much. Before we get into any of this stuff, how did you get this wealth of knowledge on that? How did you begin to understand the history through a different lens than just what we're told in the mainstream history books?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't often get asked those sorts of subjective autobiographical questions that often. So it's good. It's good practice to think about it myself, like what caused that sort of pathway, which is not conventional. Myself just thinking back to it, I do think that a big reference point I have that I think was a big qualitative shift in where I was going relative to me thinking myself 20 years ago in university studying illustration and design. I got a degree there. I went into film animation, which was more of a fine artsy film animation program in Concordia's Mel Oppenheim School of Cinema. That was around 2005. I found myself there. And it gave me a sort of taste of at least two worlds I didn't want to be in. The first illustration and design orientation was very commercial oriented, commercial art. A lot of my my friends were they were aspiring to be in the video game sector. Montreal has a bustling video game design sector.
Right.
I didn't really want to do that. Or maybe textile design, graphic design for some commercial advertising agency. I didn't really want to do that either. So it was very, very like make money, be popular, accommodate to the tastes of whatever is being sold in society. I wasn't feeling that so much. So that's where I decided, well, let's go to something a little bit more pure, authentic. So I went into the fine arts program in university and did 2 years of that. And I got another taste of another imbalanced extreme where I found that postmodernist deconstructive ideologues had sort of dominated for many decades the curriculum of the fine arts program in general. And there was an ethics of ugliness, an aesthetics that aspired to deconstruct ideas to the point of being unintelligible, ugly emotions, basically. And the philosophy underlying all of what was praised in the school system was that art should be a mirror to reality. And since reality is hypocritical, ugly, and disgusting, so should art be, to make people uncomfortable with the hypocrisy of the illusions that they live in. And I get where that's coming from, but at the same time, I was thinking to myself, well, if we're just a mirror for the ugliness of the world, how are we possibly playing any role of making the world better? Aren't we just kind of making the world more disturbed by being a representation of that? So that at least gave me a sense of the sickness, but I still didn't know what was going on. And it was around that time that I started looking into 9/11, a little bit around 2004. And, it doesn't take you long to encounter
a number of
solid
questions.
Yeah, exactly. At least the popular narrative, what we were being told, was obviously wrong. So that got my mind thinking, well, what is true? And so if there is, at a certain point, you can't really account for a lot of these things, both in terms of what came before 9/11, 9/11 itself, the obscuring of the reality of how two planes could take three buildings down, a lot of the other things that unleashed a never-ending process of wars, of regime change, killing millions in the Middle East, in a surveillance state dragnet that had, been spreading. And it was kind of still a new thing, I guess, just a few years into it. But I was very much bothered by the fact that people who appeared to be educated, and who should hold more educated views and opinions about such matters. Like for example, I was taking an elective law course on criminal law just to keep my logical side of my brain alive a little bit, because it gets mushy in the artistic world.
Right.
So I spoke to it does, it's really bad. And I spoke to, after class, the professor, who was himself a practicing a lawyer in Canada. I'll leave his name out for now, but he was a member of the Privy Council of Canada, a very high up of person on the inside. And I was like, okay, well, you seem like a very smart person. I was sharing with him some of what I was looking into after class in his office one day regarding 9/11 and some other things regarding the murder of JFK. And I was just trying to get some feedback. And I was disturbed by just how quick he was to shut me down. And I'm like, but you're like supposed to be the top of the line. So anyway, that gave me a sense that there was some connection to the cultural, because it wasn't just him. It was like there was just a lack of hunger to know truth in the general society. So then I started getting a sense that the cultural sickness that I was experiencing and was a part of in the school system, this cult of ugliness, had something to do with the cultural problem that generated mediocre people with mediocre minds who only wanted to be told what to think instead of think for themselves. So that put me through a bit of trauma for a couple of years. I was trying to process this. I took it very seriously. I couldn't just go back into the normie land very easily.
Right.
So I tried.
It's like the Matrix. Once you wake up, you really can't. Some people, they're trying really hard to plug back in, and it's not working very well.
No, it makes a lot of, like, you got to smoke a lot of dope to sort of just kind of do that. But even then, you're still going to be depressed. So I found myself really reading like I'd never read before. It was like obsessive, and I think overall a good thing, though maybe at the time I could have been a little bit more tempered on it. But I started picking up this idea that I should read original texts. So instead of like reading about Albert Pike and Freemasonic operations, I was like, well, how about I just read Albert Pike himself? Because everyone's giving me opinions about Freemasonic conspiracy. Like, let me read these people. And I did. I pursued a lot of original writings. I started listening to a lot of JFK speeches. I got in a habit of looking at, well, what were the policies that great people were doing who got cut down? What were they trying to do for society? So that it started painting a picture, but it was still leaving me with a sense of depression, in the sense that I didn't know what to do, though I had a better sense of the diagnostic of the sickness. And then it was only when I came across on a smoke break, when I was at work one day at an ad agency, that I saw a political table for a Lyndon LaRouche organization. There was a small branch in Canada, and there was some, for anybody who out there might have you ever seen a LaRouche organizing table?
No.
Okay. It was every once in a while you go to some cities in like Detroit or New York, or in this case it was Montreal, and you'll see downtown a little political table with literature and provocative signage to try to provoke people to have a political conversation, right?
Okay.
Something like that struck my eye. There was a little table. There was, and there was a sign saying something to do with stop the depopulation agenda. And I was like, I could talk about that. So I'm wasting my time. I'm talking and I'm having a conversation. And I was happy to discover that this person I was speaking to, while I didn't agree with a lot of what they were saying, they did have a solution orientation that I was lacking, and a sort of sense that there were ways out of the fire. And I didn't think that the New World Order at the time had any resistance. I was like, there's no way. It's just a matter of waiting for the big kill. That's all we got to do. Unfortunately, that's hence depression. But then I was like, okay, there seems to be something I haven't thought about. And this organization has been around for many decades. And, there's international aspects to it. So I was like, okay, I can get behind this. And I began volunteering and working for that organization, which I did for about a decade. And that gave me a chance to, I think, just focus a lot, where I just did that increasingly full time. I dropped out of school. I just focused on that. There was enough fundraising within the organization. It was hard living, but there was enough to keep a roof over my head, and I wasn't starving.
Yeah,
so I was
roof
able
and
to just do
ramen.
that. Huh? a lot of ramen, a lot of
Yeah,
a
Roofer and
lot of
ramen.
dollar store sardines. But it was good. It was like because the focus was partially on, I found myself doing a high density amount of political organizing to try to like just talk to strangers walking down the street, and it's just an interesting experience, just trying to have platonic dialogues with people who are just walking in Shadowland, and you're trying to pull them out of the shadows. I got to learn a lot of I got to practice the art of communication and dialectic, which is interesting. And then the other thing was there was a focus on education. So within the LaRouche organization at the time, especially with the younger members, there was a high focus on a curriculum going through the original discoveries of great scientists who made discoveries, read their writings, and try to just focus over the course of months and months at a time, reading through the writings of Johannes Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion. There's a lot of focus on observational astronomy. We had worked with telescopes as well to learn how to do practical astronomy as well. There's a focus also on, ancient Platonic dialogues. So read Plato's dialogues, work it through as a group, try to figure out what is Plato trying to figure out, so you could replicate these things in your own mind. And that was that took up a lot of my most qualitatively appreciated time. I'm really happy that experience was something I got to get into my belly. And I found that there's a sort of way of thinking, regardless of which great discoverer I was reading. There was a common mode of analysis and self-referential thinking, of thinking about what is the mind doing when it is trying to resolve a paradox. So how does it identify a paradox, and how does it resolve a paradox? What is the method? And you find that there's this common motion, and a common spirit of heart, a common love of beauty, which is very much tied to the pursuit of truth. So truth, beauty, very much tied to the opposite of ugliness, lies, right? So when you disrupt people's ability aesthetically, and this goes back to my education experience in fine arts, if you can disrupt a society's ability to judge ugliness or judge beauty, you also disrupt their ability to judge truth and falsehood. So then they could find flowery language said by a Trudeau or Obama, very, very pretty language that they then judge only on the surface and don't see the ugly reality behind the surface flower sweetness, right? So that was all very good. And I think when I began to apply that method a little bit to try to solve certain problems that were bothering me, like what was Canada? I was supposed to organize in Canada. I was going to Parliament, trying to organize parliamentarians and senators. We were having meetings with embassies, but I didn't know fully the terrain of what the hell this British monarchy of Canada was. What is the Privy Council? What is the lieutenant governor's offices? What is this deep state structure that I had a better idea of it in the United States, because the LaRouche organization is a U.S. organization with a lot of U.S. research under its belt since the 60s. So they pieced together a lot of puzzles very, very efficiently over that time. But Canada was relatively untapped domain. I didn't know, nobody did the work. So I was like, well, I'm going to try to take the lead and figure out some of these bigger questions. And it bore fruit. It worked. It took a lot of work, but and that turned into my research on the untold history of Canada that I first began publishing in 2012. After a lot of research and some good collaborators I found to work with, a lot of time spent in the Montreal archives in Ottawa, and then increasingly that manifested in the Canadian Patriot Review magazine around that time, and a few other things. So, but I think that's sort of my autobiographical experience.
And are your parents into geopolitics? Like, is this something that you sat around and talked about at the dinner table as a kid, or what?
No, we didn't talk about that stuff.
Okay. So we've hit on a couple of really interesting things that I think are, first, I love you talk about primary sources and first principles. Can you speak to that? What is that for people that maybe have never heard those terms before?
First principles simply means causality. If you think about, like, there's two different categories of causality. First lesson, okay, for anybody, just general lesson of thinking. If I release this pen, right, what caused the pen to be released? Well, if you're a materialist, and this matters, like the mechanical explanation is useful, but it has its place. It shouldn't be elevated to something more than what it is. The mechanical reason is what? If I ask you this, what caused me mechanically? I let go of it. Yeah. And I could find another, why did I let go of it? Well, I could say, what caused me to let go of it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could get really mechanical, but your hand open.
My hand open. And if I say what caused that, I could say like my nerves, right?
Right.
I had some like reaction between the synaptic activity in my brain, my nerves causing my bones to release, will cause my bones to release, well, the muscle, and that I could go, that's an infinite regression I could take if I wanted to. There's no point of stopping anywhere because there's always something else in between, right?
Right.
So that's useful, but it's very limited. If the satisfying what you could call motive principle, ultimately the sufficient reason that made all of those material things happen was what?
Well, the pen drop.
Yeah, but the motive principle, what was the true cause of all of this?
Well, you desired, I don't know, your brain. Yeah.
I desired it. I had an intention. I wanted to make a point, right? So that metaphysical, that's not a physical thing. That intention I had isn't a physical thing like all of those predicates were. So it's like that for any conspiracy with human affairs. We're a creature animated not simply by gravity and our biological mechanisms, which are important. Obviously, if you starve, you're not going to think too much if you can't eat. But that's not all we are, right? So we're a species animated by ideas and wrong ideas and right ideas that are more or less in alignment with the truth. Right. Will manifest in decisions we make, both in terms of what goes on outside of us, as well as the decisions to shape that will shape our identities, how we see ourselves, right? So our identity, animals just are what they are. They don't like celebrate their great grandpa lion. Right. The great grandpa lion happened, but it's not like humans where we can go and like read the writings of great grandpa and have a communication with Plato 2,000 years earlier, right? Who's been long dead, but I could still communicate with Plato in that sense. So we have this, because of this question of free will, ideas, identity. We can choose to be our nature, or we could choose to be outside of our nature, to fall off of our path and become more bestialized, more inclined to do some things that give us the appearance of happiness, but not the real thing. That maybe even give us more senses of absence and regret later on, more deeper spiritual pain later by giving into momentary desires for fame or pleasure or whatever, right? Name a vice. So conspiracies are kind of like that. If you want to know the motive force of a conspiracy or of human affairs, you have to go to ideas, intentions, and this is where in especially the 60s, there was this program to say conspiracy theories don't exist. It's irresponsible to think about conspiracy theories because everything can be reduced to some combination of corruption and stupidity, and if you and you don't need to think about it any more deeply. You know, like the lone gunman was stupid. He killed Kennedy. Somebody else was corrupt and they did something bad. They started a war in Vietnam because they were corrupt and wanted money for the military industrial complex. You don't have to think about it any more than that. And it's like, well, that really handicaps your ability to understand anything causal. So that's my point on. And what was your other question? Those
primary sources and first principles, the values.
Okay, so that's first principles in the sense of the human domain. The first principles otherwise often deal with the question of God. You know, the idea of the soul. Because why are we good? Why do we do good things? Why are we willing to sacrifice for children? There's things that sometimes we're not even aware of that deal with the question of our soul, our conscience, that dances with our reason, that is related to our concept of the purpose of our life, design of our life, the purpose, which is tied to the idea of, well, if there's a design, then there's a designer. That implies an idea of God. Well, what's the purpose of the universe, right? So that you always have to go there in even healthy science. You'll find a Da Vinci or an Einstein or a Max Planck always have that idea of first principle. And
primary sources. Why is that? Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, just don't read Wiki. You don't have to read Wikipedia. Wikipedia could help on a first approximation of anything, but rather than reading an encyclopedia entry or some expert telling you what to think about somebody, whether you want to know about Ben Franklin or Dante Alighieri, Well, the first thing to do would be to read Ben Franklin's writings. There's a lot of them. You can get them.
Yeah.
Straight out
Yeah.
of my head. It's
love
Ben
that.
Franklin. You just read his writings, read his letters, read his autobiography, read Dante Alighieri's letters, read his De Monarchia, read his Commedia, and then develop your own thoughts. Develop and look at what these people, Dante or Ben Franklin, were doing in the world that they lived in. What identity did they have themselves that shaped how they intervened? Like Da Vinci once said, I discovered in looking at the lives of great people that they didn't wait for things to happen to them. They went out and happened to things. And that's what people are doing. Like they are not satisfied with the injustice of a world and understand that they have to do something to intervene. They can't make it all better, but they can make themselves qualified to play a positive role in shaping a process towards the good. So you can do that. And you'll find that after that exercise takes place, which takes a bit of time, but it's worth it, then you can revisit a lot of the expert opinions about these figures and find that they're mostly all wrong, either outright lying about what they were a part of, and develop, a structure based on your own sovereign mind, having constructed, an edifice that has solid foundation instead of other people's opinions contaminated with half-truths or lies.
Right. And pre-digested opinions about things that, like you said, that may be half-truths. And something a lot of people, I think, is a good prerequisite for people to be aware of is there's something called the reputation management. Companies pay big money to companies. There was a book written called The Google Bomb, and it was basically in the early days of Google, basically a malicious and unhappy customer just took it upon themselves to tear down some guy's business because they just weren't happy and maybe a little psychotic. And so the book was kind of like a warning and a need to pay attention to and to cater, like, your reputation is everything. And what are other people saying about us? And with the power of the internet, someone could easily go make 100 free accounts. If they were that motivated, they go make 100 free accounts and leave you bad reviews. There's something called the Oprah effect, where Oprah's team had to investigate companies before they get mentioned or featured on her show, because it would kill businesses. Like if you have a nice little bakery and Oprah's like, oh, I love this little bakery on the corner of whatever and whatever. She says on national TV, and you get slammed with 50,000 people, phone calls, drop-bys, orders on your online store, and you're like a small operation of 5 people. People don't care that you were inundated with work. The negative reviews will pile up and swallow you, with a sense of, hey, like they got my order wrong. Hey, they took so long to get this. And so they call it the Oprah effect, where it would have a big boost or it could kill your business if you weren't prepared. They actually would have to have a team audit your business. Are you prepared for this, right? Like, are we gonna kill your business and your livelihood because we're gonna bombard you with so much flow and traffic? And so there's a whole industry called reputation management. And this is where companies pay big money to have their reputation managed. Politicians, all these sorts of people make bad things that happened in my past, people talk about, go away. Very bad headlines. This was an old strategy where even when I am a martial arts school in Kingston, we would create content and list it on multiple websites. You'd have a Wikipedia page, you'd have a Squidoo Lens, you'd have a WordPress blog on like your own, but you'd also have it on domain.wordpress.org, because your site could only take out one listing on the internet. And so by getting on all these other platforms and getting articles about you written and things, you could now push everything down. And the best place to hide a body is the second page of Google search results. So that's kind of this whole reputation thing. And there's, so there's money in being able to create good publicity for people and to hide and bury bad publicity. And people have short memories in a lot of ways. So I think this is an important thing as a bit of a prerequisite to know that that's part of why it's really important that we do work from primary sources and first principles. The whole concept of fact checking websites in itself, it's them saying, hey, don't burden yourself with having to do your own research. Let us just tell you what to think. And if you just search on a couple different search engines and compare it with Google, you'll find that Google search results have been designed now to tell you what to think on the topic. It's not just, I need the facts of this. It's, oh, here's the answer that you need to be thinking of on this topic. And that's a really powerful thing when it's just a subtle difference between here are the facts, which you might be more likely to get like on a Yahoo search, versus this is what your opinion should be on the topic, right? Which is implicitly is said. And that's, it was like they said, it's, people during COVID, everyone was scoffing like, oh, don't do your own research, don't do it. And I heard this great comedian who was talking about this should be called a good thing. Like what you never, friends would never say that, like, oh, I'm gonna go buy a car. Oh, well, don't look it up. Don't do any of your own research. Just go talk to the sales guy. He'll tell you everything you need to know. Like that's, and that was, people didn't realize what they were doing and saying, but that was the whole COVID. Like, are you an epidemiologist? Don't do your own research. Like, but it's,
Well, you get that a lot in academia as well, and if you want to, like, you're often told, well, hey, if you're unless you have a PhD, you're not allowed to have an opinion that's worth anything about economics. So you have to have been through a processing machinery and have published papers, and then we'll respect whatever your opinion is about economics.
Right.
Well, what if economics we wonder, why is it all collapsing? Why did we have a subprime bubble? Why do people think that it's okay that there's 40 times more derivative contracts outstanding than global GDP? It's all one giant speculative frenzy. And what happened to our manufacturing? What happened to our infrastructure that used to be the backbone that gave meaning and value to our economic base? It's gone. We shut it all down. We atrophied. We bled out. And it's like, well, if this is what the experts who are like trained in the best universities, Ivy League universities of Harvard and Yale and the University of Toronto and Oxford and Cambridge, I mean, if these greatest, smartest minds in the room are producing these effects by applying the ideas that they've learned and published in their high-end university systems with their PhDs and got the effects of total decay and self-destruction, maybe there's something wrong with those very expert opinions we're told to calibrate ourselves around, or global warming, same deal, right? Like, unless you've adopted all of the core dominant assumptions by the modern secular priesthood, and it is a priesthood, but masquerading around they replaced the god of religion with a new god of science. They just call it science, but it's not science if they say the debate is over. Like, we're not going to question this medical thesis that the World Health Organization is telling us all to change our entire world around, even if it means like becoming human guinea pigs for some sort of a pharmaceutical complex, or shutting down our vital hydroelectric plants and hydrocarbon energy facilities. All of these things are being shut down to save nature, according to the consensus of some unnamed body of so-called experts whose names I'm not even allowed to know their names. I'm just told 97% of all experts say that human-made CO2 is causing the Earth to change its climate, and you don't even know who their names are. It's just that they're using a form of groupthink and intimidation by a top-down academic priesthood that won't allow you to publish your papers in respectable journals unless you adopt their core assumptions. Like, yes, CO2 causes temperature to change. It's like, well, no, actually. No, there's
so does every single human activity, from flipping a light switch to being born to dying. Everything that we do creates carbon. So if it's all we have to count our carbon, that means that our entire existence has to be micro managed. I want to talk about this because you said something really important, I think, and I'm passionate about this. They talked about the science. So Karl Popper was one of the earliest and best science educators, and he had a formula for science. He said, first off, there is no scientific method. There is no process by which we guarantee breakthroughs. But what we have is a process that we go through that helps keep us from fooling ourselves. And it is P1 plus TS plus EE equals P2. And P1 is problem 1 plus temporary solution plus eliminate the errors, which we do through experimentation, observation, research, right? Collaboration with others, equals P2. Or you don't arrive at P2, but now you realize the flaws in your temporary solution and you loop back and come up with a new temporary solution. David Deutsch wrote a fantastic book. It's not an easy read, but it's really a great book to kind of pick and chew through a couple times a year. It's called The Beginning of Infinity. He's the godfather of quantum computing. And he talks about how good science is built on specific explanations with details that are hard to vary. So as an example, the Greeks used to have, I guess there's a myth about why we have winter. It was some goddess was kidnapped and raped and taken to Hades, and the world cries, and so that's why we have winter. But the mom went down and negotiated her release a couple of months a year, and that's why we have spring and summer, because we're happy this goddess princess is coming home. But if you live on the equator, you don't have winter. And so this explanation doesn't account for those types of specificity. Whereas, we used to think we were in the center of the universe, and how we discovered we weren't is someone had a specific explanation. And then once we had telescopes, we were able to prove it by observing the phases of the moon and the phases of Venus. So by seeing the phases of Venus and the phases of the moon, the only way that that could be explained is by the geometry, anyways, by the math. It wasn't me, guys. So I'm just going to, but describing there must be a giant source of light approximating this size, this distance from these things, which should be operating in these orbits in order to create shadows in this way. And that is such a specific explanation. You can't change any of the details without ruining the outcome of it. And that's what good science, like a library of books, you get one really solid, good explanation, E = mc squared. And then you build another one on top and another one on top and another one on top. But your assumptions are only good as the data that is built on. And almost even in a company, companies do regular audits, quarterly, annual audits. We should be doing that of our assumptions in science as well, because if we've built a wall and layered 10 layers of bricks on top of a false assumption, that it becomes a linchpin for that whole wall of beliefs to come crumbling down. So to speak to your point, the truth doesn't mind being questioned. Science is asking questions, and you don't need consensus in order for science. You don't need consensus. You need one person who's followed the scientific method and has a repeatable process that can explain how it works that other people can then verify for themselves. We don't need consensus. Consensus, it's not about consensus. This isn't a circle jerk. It's about, hey, I've got this, empirical data, this repeatable experiment that we can do that proves this, and then you work your way backwards. So,
yeah.
Now let's,
Well, I could speak on that, or
Sure.
we could, yeah. I mean, because
Sure.
I think that part of the thing that I'd observed in reading through a lot of these great discoverers, the people who really made big discoveries in the course of their lives, they didn't waste their time, is that they have a very process orientation in their minds. They're thinking about the universe not simply from a descriptive vantage point. They don't want to just describe the universe. They recognize that they themselves subjectively are a part of that universe that they're trying to uncover.
Right.
And like there's this quote by Max Planck that I really enjoyed. I pulled it up as you were writing, and I'm not a big Karl Popper fan, but I don't have any disagreement in fundamentally in what you said about his observation about the structure of a discovery. But Max Planck had said in his philosophy of physics that science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature. And that is, in the last analysis, because we ourselves are part of nature and therefore part of the mystery that we are trying to solve. Music and art are, to an extent, also attempts to solve or at least express that mystery. But to my mind, the more we progress in either, the more we are brought into harmony with all of nature itself. And that is one of the greatest services of science to the individual. And I like that because he's, on the one hand, bridging that thing I really want to be bridged, that arts and science wall that's been put, artificially in place by this empire that we live under. I love the fact he's busting that wall down. And number two, he's busting also the wall of the objective subjective, which is not, it's an artificial wall that's been put there. And number three, he's got the sense of tuning ourselves as individuals, but also tuning the species that we are also a part of, that he elaborates a lot more in his essay, 1938, Philosophy of Physics. If people can find it, go and read it. It's great. And he made discoveries. It's not like he's just any old philosopher who's like commenting. He's the guy who actually opened up and discovered the nature of the quantum itself, right, by looking at black body radiation and found a way of testing it. Now, part of the observation that he made along the way is that, and this opened up the door to the entire quantum domain. And he worked very closely with Einstein, right? He was actually a concert pianist. Einstein was a violinist. They would perform Mozart together when they needed to unlock their creative juices that couldn't solve certain logical problems that they were grappling with. Both of them throughout their lives would play, and when they were in the same town together, they would meet up and play classical music together, and then return back to their formulas and discover that they were able to tap into a creative spark that allowed for resolutions of paradoxes that were unresolvable, because they weren't. That's why machine learning can't replace human learning, because machine learning can only do that logical deductive, inductive reasoning.
Yeah, there's no new knowledge created. It's just the logical. Yeah. Yeah, it's
Ultimately,
just
yeah, it could
speculative.
add more complexity, but not higher quality. Like complexity can always be increased, but you can't get to a place where all of a sudden you can create a qualitatively new hypothesis that is
Right,
incommensurable to the old sets that
right.
pre-existed, that new insight that is tied to inspiration. It's tied to a variety of immaterial things that can't be charted in a computer model.
Right.
And it also gives a power. As I mentioned, the human species is being tuned to the universe in that sense. Well, what are the effects of that? Well, one of the things, if you read LaRouche's writings, like LaRouche, he died in 2019. He was 96 years old, but he was somebody who he had set up the Fusion Energy Foundation in the 70s and 80s. He had worked with some of the most cutting edge scientists who were being at that time iced out. They were the people who made the discoveries in space and the atomic worlds, who were being at that time iced out by the new generation of technocratic mechanists, the positivists who were being introduced into academia and to government at that time, but they were still alive. Today, most of them are dead, unfortunately, but they were working with LaRouche around this Fusion Energy Foundation. And part of the idea of LaRouche was that, look, physical economy is based on the relationship of the mind of the individual to all of society, and that there's a reciprocity, right? When somebody like a Ben Franklin discovers something like electricity, all of a sudden, the very system that Ben Franklin is a part of is now liable, susceptible to a qualitative upshift by the application of that new discovery in the form of new technologies that are made possible by that discovery having happened. And all of a sudden, you can sustain more people at a higher quality of life with greater productive forces per capita and per square kilometer that allow you to overcome the limits to growth that the British cynical imperialists who follow Thomas Malthus say is impossible. Because these guys are all about controlling what already exists, not encouraging new ideas and new inventions to ever be brought into being, because that upsets the established monopolies and the established order of controls in the school system, in the banking system, in the raw material systems controls of London, which had managed the one world government before and after the American Revolution.
Right. Yeah, I love that you brought this up, because there's some great examples. You know, when the founder steps away and the accountants and the lawyers move in, no disrespect to them, you know, we need some of these people to come in to help expand. Like you mentioned, if you can solve a problem for the world, it's almost a duty to go out and reach everyone who's in pain that you can help, right? That makes sense. And that's not always the founder's vision. Often the founders are the visionaries that are just passionate about doing the thing. They're not necessarily passionate about finding everyone on the planet that they can serve. And so you do need sort of the managers and the scalers to come in. But Blockbuster versus Netflix is an example I love to look at, where Blockbuster was a $6 billion company and they were wiped out by a new startup called Netflix. And with $6 billion, Blockbuster could have hired any talent they wanted. They could have developed any technology they wanted. They could have bought Netflix, but they just were so focused on monetizing and expanding into new markets. They weren't really focused on what problem they solved for humanity, back to your point. And they got wiped out because they didn't realize how the competitive advantage that Netflix had. Same thing with newspapers and blogs. They lost touch with the people and what the pain point was that they solved. Blockbuster thought they were in the movie of, like, you know, basically toll boothing, you know, movie content, creative content. But if you are like a waitress, if you're a waiter, if you're a construction worker, you've been on your feet all day, you don't want to drive to a store, stand in front of a wall of paralysis by analysis, pick a movie, take it home, and then be charged extra because you're so damn busy you couldn't go back and drop it off on time. Whereas Netflix was like Domino's Pizza for movies. You get a catalog, you know, you get your menu, you pick an order, they delivered it to your house. And, you know, it was just super straightforward and simple. It was a better solution to the problem. Now, you mentioned the limits of growth. So I used to be a fan of Bill Gates. I went on a spree and I was like, I'm going to follow all the billionaires of the world. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Let me go find these billionaires. I started following all and drinking all their Kool-Aid. Really, some of these people are psychotic. Now, before I got to that, which I kind of already knew. See, I left Canada and went and worked in California, and I helped a company make over $3 million in under 8 months. And what happened with all that money washing around just bewildered me. Because in my mind, I'm like, we won the Super Bowl. We've got the Super Bowl winning team. We need to keep the team together, right? We need to go and win more games and create a legacy. Whereas it was like, it just became shark infested waters, and like the social games, like I don't even know how to, I'm reaching for terms here, but they're just like, people became manipulative. There was the social dynamics suddenly became into play, and this person ate that person's commission and pushed them out and brought their people in. I was just so shocked at how things went, because I'm like, you guys destroyed it. Like, we had a championship team, and you were so focused on the fucking money in the bank account now that what about all the money we could have made had if we kept everyone together? And I was just bewildered by that. And I used to be a fan of Bill Gates. And then I remember in January 2020, he published a video on his YouTube channel called Limits of Growth. And I'm like, hey, I've heard of that somewhere. Where do I know that? And I started Googling it. And then you find out about the Club of Rome and and the whole like, with the planet can only handle so many people. And even if we make developments in technology, it's never going to be enough. But you can't predict the future like that. This is the managers came in, not the inventors, not the creators, not the founders. This is the accountants and the lawyers have moved in, and they have this limited worldview, and they've scaled it and they've profited by taking, someone's idea, someone's product, someone's solution. I mean, Bill Gates didn't even make the operating system, right? He just took it and he just ran it through to our benefit. I mean, we wouldn't be able to do this call without that, so. But I mean, at this point, they lack the vision. They don't understand that process. They think they do, and maybe they have their own creative process. But this whole limits of growth thing was like, oh, the planet can only handle about 2 billion people, and we're all going to die if we don't do anything about that. And Mao killed tens of millions in this vision, for we're doing the dirty deed now to save future generations. Where did all this start? Is it the Club of Rome? I mean, obviously we had the Khazaria Mafia. Like, where does this begin? And, I've heard people say there's no such thing as good and evil. And I go, well, if you want to live, then you know that drinking bleach is not good. And if someone tried to get you to drink bleach, that could be deemed as evil. So clearly there is a good and evil if you want to stay alive. It doesn't, it might be the other side of the coin, like mushrooms and fungus eat dead things. It's food to them. I don't want to eat my feces, but there's other things that like it. But for me, eating feces is bad. So there is good and bad for me.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And okay, so from a metaphorical standpoint, yeah, like there's something about the cycles of nature that we could you take in from as lessons from the external world. Right. What you need and and it's also shaped by where you're at, so if you're a selfish prick, you will look at some of these metaphors of nature, of the cyclical nature of the carbon cycle of other things, and you'll be like, well, that proves that stasis and limits are embedded in nature, and to be good natural beings we should just be as static as possible. Yes. And maybe we should try to convince people to eat their own feces at the end of the day and become perfect closed systems. We can even maybe find a way to like put some sugar on it and sell it to them. Maybe they'll even want to do that. It's called Coca-Cola, and whatever. But you can give it a sexy branding. You could make mud seem sexy and tasty if you could get people who are celebrities to promote it. Right. It's like even like heavy metal. I remember when I was in school, a lot of the kids were listening to heavy metal around me when I was in, 12, 13 years old. I didn't like it, but I didn't want to be the loner. And so I forced myself. I bought a couple of CDs, Pantera and a few other things. And I just forced myself to like listen. And after a while, I got to tell you, I started liking it. Yeah. And that's humans, if we intend to, if we have that intention, everything unnatural can become something enjoyable to a degree. There's still something wrong deep, and you can see that you put a kid in a room 3-4 years old, and you just pump in heavy metal, the kid's gonna start crying. They want to get out of the room, right? Play some Mozart or some Bach to a child, they're just gonna be kind of happy. And they did studies like this on rats going through mazes using like one test group with no sound, no music. They got through on average at a certain speed. Another group with Mozart being played, they improved their speed of problem solving. And then they had another group with, I forget which, I think it was 9 Inch Nails, and they started cannibalizing themselves. So it just shows you that, like they actually started like eating their bodies, right? And so it just shows you that even in the fabric of nature, there's frequencies, there's rhythms, there's cycles. And depending on, like I said, if you're somebody who's just focused on yourself first, managing things for the sake of some lower motive, then you will take in the worst lessons that nature could show. Whereas if you are somebody who is creative and you really just want to make things work, then you are going to take you'll look at the same things and take in a completely different set of lessons from that process. And you'll notice that, look, we're living in a world that's very thriving and bustling with life on the third rock from a sun. And it's a miraculous thing because, I mean, first of all, how, but like other planets don't have this rich density of life. So, we have to imagine that at a certain point, there wasn't life on the planet. And then for whatever thing, we haven't discovered why yet, then the life appeared. And life didn't just appear and stay the way it was with single-celled amoebas 500 million years ago in the Precambrian. There was something that resulted in that phase of simple-celled cycles, very slow sets of motions, very, very hard to detect probably that life, to the point that you had higher forms of organisms emerge. Older systems disappeared. 99.9% of the species that have ever been no longer exist, not because of humans with SUVs, but it's part of something going on in our solar system and in our galaxy that we have yet to understand, but we should be thinking about. But all of a sudden we're having a conversation over like light communication on satellites that is allowing us to have this conversation at two sides of the earth. And you're like, what caused that process? So embedded within the individual cycles within short periods of time, you've got this higher function of life leaping over the limits to growth, right? Going outside of the aqueous environment of early life to becoming land spreading living to creating new types of things like chlorophyll that all of a sudden appeared, allowing for the radiant sun's energy to be used to fulfill biological functions that involve transforming carbon dioxide into oxygen and back and forth, right? So you got this whole process of ongoing creation that all of a sudden we seem to appear on the scene and can all of a sudden embody that in a self-conscious way. And what would take maybe a million years if left to itself, like a desert turning into something green, which happens, sometimes green things turn desert and sometimes deserts turn green over time. We can all of a sudden take like desalination of ocean water or Mediterranean water, like Gaddafi was doing, desalinate, bringing it into deserts that all of a sudden can do something in like 10, 20 years that would take otherwise maybe 10,000 or 100,000 years if left to itself.
So this is, humans are knowledge creation machines. This is, again, David Deutsch talking about AI. AI, it needs to be able to create new knowledge, not like, again, if we just infer things based off of what we observe, we would never have really figured out that the sun was the middle of the universe. We wouldn't have. Someone had to have that imagination, that creative process to come up with that, and then create with how do we test and experiment to prove it. This is like this romanticized concept of spaceship Earth, like, oh, we're on this planet and it's our spaceship and we just need to take care of it and they'll take care of us. The bandwidth of longitude and latitude that humans survive in without all of our technology and developments is incredibly narrow. We're both Canadian. You couldn't live in Canada. You would die. The pioneers did die. They came in like the spring and summer was like, wow, this is paradise. And then it turned to winter and most of them died because it wasn't spaceship Earth. It wasn't this beautiful place where, oh, I just pick things up from the ground and eat them. If you look at the evolution of even the watermelon, we couldn't get the calories that we needed from watermelon until we crossbred it and trained it to give us and produce this bountiful fruit. So it's literally of this, it's a symbiotic relationship where we're as much part of the planet as the planet is us. If you right? How much of a fish is water versus, or ocean versus, you take the fish out of the ocean, it ceases to be a fish. So we're part of this, but at the same time, it is like a yin yang, almost adversarial relationship in a sense where we are, almost like a friendly competition, making each other better, hopefully by trying like all this stuff. We like, if I left you alone in the woods, Joe Rogan said this, if I dropped you off, left you alone in the woods, how long till you came back with a cell phone? Like left you there and you had to build everything from scratch. Right? Like there's this process where we turn the world into, we are knowledge creation machines. So, and some rule books are written in blood. And this is where I think that's almost the role religions tried to play. Like, hey, here's some of the rules that we've learned that were written, that were written in blood and, cross them. I mean, I'm spiritual, not religious, but it's just hard to argue with some of them, especially in light of certain things that have been happening. So I know I want to be respectful of your time. And I just want to kind of get like what's your overview of the prognosis? I know before when we talked about doing this interview, Nazis in Parliament and the fact Chrystia Freeland's like grandfather and uncle are all SS Nazis. The fact that Trudeau's dad let thousands of Nazis into Canada, knowing their names and knowing they were war criminals, just was like, yeah, come on, set up homes here. and somehow they hid them, or they just hid in plain sight basically for years. That became suddenly common knowledge amongst Canadians. It was a real wake-up call, because before we talked about, eugenics, and hey, some of this stuff that's happened with COVID really seems to have echoes of history. People just balked at you. But this is not, this is not the last 5 years. It goes way deeper than this. And, for those people, like, what, from your research, like, where did it start? Our last interview, we talked about the city of London being sort of the hub of it all because of their colonization of the colonies, but I think it even happened before that. And, I know of the Khazarian mafia. I don't know the Khazarian mafia,
Okay.
but yeah.
All right, let's break this down. All right, and don't worry. As you were talking, I just canceled my. I had a little telephone call scheduled. I pushed it over a couple hours, so we can go on for a little extra while, because I think that you're bringing up something that I find is important to talk about.
Okay.
And I did kind of forget to address it in the previous question. I in my Clash of the Two Americas book series, volume 3 and volume 4, I have 2 chapters in either one. On Khazaria. There are a lot of sub-narratives throughout history that have been created by the very oligarchy that's been continuously trying to manipulate us. Because ultimately, what does the oligarchy want? What does any oligarch really ultimately want? The motive, whether today or in ancient Greece and Rome or in Babylon, it's ultimately kind of, or in the medieval times during the Crusades, it's ultimately qualitatively the same thing, which is stasis, obedience, feudalism. They want a glorified, absolute, crystallized strata of master-slave relations with a feudal mass of slave families that are perfectly obedient and happy to be slaves, unwilling to test out new ideas or push the limits of what they're permitted to live in, mentally and physically, under a lord class of inbred, hierarchically self-ordained masters in their privilege that they were born into with their, And so that's all that really they want at the end of the day. They want the right to be perpetually lazy and useless and have people serve them.
Also called parasites. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a bit of Freudian projection. What they're doing is that they then project out and say the worst attributes of the oligarchical social class is what we are as humans in general. And then they get us to think that we're all kind of like little versions of oligarchs, and we're kind of thus like all naturally parasites, and the world would be better off with much fewer of us. And that's how they brainwash, especially kids, by getting them to think like, okay, we multiplied just like cancer cells, and so we're just like a cancer against Gaia. They've done the same sort of sleight of hand. There is a parasitic class, but as we're talking, it's the oligarchy. And so they proceed. Before there was Khazaria, there was this oligarchy. Okay, it goes back in a direct continuity. Some of the leading families today, like the Orsini family, there's a whole handful of families openly trace their heritage back, their lineage, to several doges, a couple of popes, before that even to a couple of emperors of Rome. Some of the leading families that managed the cult structures, because Rome was managed by cults and subcults, like the cult of Dionysus, the cult of Mithridates, which is the military cult. There's the cult of Cybele, which is a precursor to what became the Gaia cult, the Earth Mother Gaia worship. A lot of these involved pagan rituals, sacrifice of children. Baal and Baphomet became also outgrowths of some of these things. A lot of them are tied. If you look at the Greek or the Roman or the Babylonian or Persian pantheons or the Assyrian pantheons of gods, oftentimes they're tied to certain planets, but they're often the same gods, but with different names that accommodate different cultures, but it's the same gods. Like Apollo, before it was Apollo was the Greek manifestation of the god of Marduk, previous to Apollo's existence. That was the dominant god of the Babylonian pantheon, managed by a priesthood that had a sort of set of rites of initiations to go through mystery, a sort of set of rituals that would induce the mind of the initiate to deconstruct their humanity in order to be reconstructed around what would be more in harmony with an oligarchical destiny for that person, whether they were in a higher family to be an upper alpha like plus, or whether they were going to be an auxiliary, somebody who is going to be a technocratic manager within a certain jurisdiction. They would have to go through a set of experiences to make them more trustworthy, so that their decisions would be then shaped by a self-identity that would be given to them by a set of acts that would worship one of these ultimately satanic gods. And Apollo became a precursor. He's the god of light, became a precursor for Lucifer, morning star. Same. Yeah, they're just rebrandings of what is ultimately the same thing. So I'm saying this because in my book series and in my research, I was surprised to discover that Khazaria is a wind egg. It's a false hate object that was crafted for us going back quite a while. But I think it was really Arthur Koestler who was the first to put forth this weaving of the historic narrative for people who would be, for those who would be inclined to recognize a continuity of conspiracy utilizing banking agencies, as we know that there are. For those whose minds would go there would be sub narratives to capture their minds in controlled cages. The Khazaria cage, which was then amplified by David Icke in the 1990s, and it sort of took on a life of its own after that, painted the image of like Mordor from Lord of the Rings as Khazaria. It's this area of today's like part of Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, that was a zone that converted to Judaism. It was formerly a Turkic kingdom that had moved north under King Bulan, settled as a kingdom, and for whatever reason we don't know, not a lot of most of the records have been destroyed, so we don't have that much to, we have some things but not very much to work with, but so there's a lot of speculation that fills in the void. But there was a conversion in around 750 to Judaism in the kingdom that accompanied a period of renaissance, massive qualitative bursts of creative increase in the Christian world of Charlemagne, who he was the son of Pepin the Short, not a great name, but a really great leader, who did a lot to unify the Christian world. And Charlemagne sort of did a lot to create this massive dynasty. They purged the remnants of the pagan cults that had taken control of the Western Roman Empire. And there was a period of just like cathedral building, teaching of orphans, building canals, like internal improvements, and most importantly, a foreign policy centered around cooperation on win-win cooperation with your neighbors. Like in the case in that time, it was in the Muslim world, you had the Abbasid dynasty of Harun al-Rashid, who coexisted as the head of the Muslim world with Charlemagne, and they were friends. There was efforts to try to get a Muslim-Christian religious war by Rome, who had a puppet pope at the time, run by the remnants of the Roman Empire, who consolidated their power after Rome collapsed in the West. A lot of these leading families moved partially some of them moved into Constantinople to recreate the Byzantine Empire in the Eastern Roman area. And there's a lot of evil there. There was some good there too, but a lot of evil. Then a big chunk went to Venice and began reconstructing the empire in Venice as the new center of command, which it later on became for about 800 years of the entire world. And then a few also maintained themselves around Rome itself, around the papacy. So they were trying to get this religious war that became later on the Crusades. They tried to get the Crusades started 200 years earlier. And the way that Charlemagne got around it is he said to Harun al-Rashid, he sent an embassy to him, and he said, look, that Holy Land, technically, we're being pushed into a war to take it back. There's a lot of pressure on Charlemagne to get into a war. And Harun al-Rashid said, okay, here's what we're going to do. He sends the embassy back with an elephant as a gift to Charlemagne, and he says, I'm going to give you the deed to the Holy Land. It's yours. You can have it, and I will be your I will protect it, but it's yours. And the elephant is too. And Charlemagne rode that elephant for 20 years
That's great.
into battle and everything.
I love that.
Yeah, it's cool. And they had this blossoming. So in the case of the Muslim world, you had the Abbasid Renaissance, increases of life expectancy, arts, poetry increased, but you had these what's called the houses of wisdom. These all over Baghdad. You had Jews and Christians and even Chinese and Indians would go to the Muslim world in Baghdad, and they would read the original writings of the Greeks that were being translated. They would do astronomy together. There were dozens of these things. They were growing up also in Europe too. Now, the thing with Khazaria is it seemed to be a mediating zone of diplomatic brilliance. All of the diplomats of Khazaria would speak upwards of 13, 14 languages. You had the Jewish Radhanite traders as well that had maintained the trade routes around the Silk Road that had been revived between the Tang Dynasty. Because the key thing here is China. That's what makes all of this possible, is that China at the time had overcome a 450-year dark age, where after the collapse of the Han Dynasty, which was a 400-year-long dynasty that had seen for the first time the emergence of the Silk Road in 200 BC, and that maintained itself until about 200 AD, when the Han collapsed. It went into a dark age, kind of like what happened to Rome. When Rome collapsed, you had like the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Huns, everybody just sort of coming up as warlords, taking control of little territorial zones after the system collapsed into chaos. Same thing was happening in China. Populations collapsed, divide to conquer, right? There's like tons of little mini micro lords, warlords, and then it was resolved with the Tang Dynasty in around 618. And within 50 years, the Tang Dynasty revives the Silk Road, which is the transit corridors of economic commerce between China and Europe, moving through mostly there's one main corridor through the Middle East, and it was Jewish Radhanite traders that were stationed maintaining the trade routes. And again, they spoke many languages. You had the delegations going, like the embassies were being often trained by the Khazaria had a very big role to play in managing peaceful relations between coexisting kingdoms. Big Jewish community being also set up with a big Muslim community in China at the time. Like the Muslims had even sent an army of 5,000 to help the Chinese emperor put down a civil war. And out of that, the Chinese were so grateful that they gave the Muslims free land to live, which they did, and that's where the Xinjiang. That's why there's Muslims in China today, because they saved China and they saved the Silk Road. And in Khazaria, it wasn't just a Jewish kingdom, because at the same time as they converted, the way it was set up was around a supreme court, like a judicial system, which had 7 judges that would judge the laws of the land, and that the king was subservient to, in many ways was sort of subservient to. You had two positions were for Christians, 2 positions were for Muslims, 2 positions were for Jews, and 1 was for like a Stoic or a pagan from the Grecian period. And so you had this ecumenical structure, and there's a whole variety of other things too. They actually didn't have their own army. They didn't have a Jewish army. They had a Muslim army. That's another thing. So Khazaria actually had an arrangement with King Harun al-Rashid, who provided a Muslim army of defense with the condition that Khazaria would be defended by them, under the one condition that unless any war were waged that would benefit the Jewish kingdom, in that case they would turn on them. So it was a good way to keep them both in check, but also to create a trustworthy relationship, and they lived in Khazaria. So it was, again, this is something that the oligarchy has been obsessively afraid of being revived again. They've been working desperately to stop it, and that's what the Crusades were all about. It took them a lot longer after Charlemagne dies. It takes them a few generations to start breaking up the Christian kingdom using Charlemagne's 3 stupid sons, Pepin II and Louis the whatever. Anyway, they're Charles the Bald. Anyway, there's like stupid grandsons, and they
like a Dick Tracy movie. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, it's not that different. It's a way, but these stupid kids, they're all opportunists, and they're persuaded by advisors who conveniently often come from Venice. to sign something called the Oath of Strasbourg in 842 or 843. And this oath basically carves up Charlemagne's territory into 3 sub-kingdoms. And that's where the borders of, because people wonder, like, where do the borders of today's European nations come from? That's where it came from. So they began the carving up process with Lothar, Lothar the unfortunate one, getting the Lotharingia in the middle of the 2 opposing areas, which and then these 2 kids on either side of Lothar's domain sign a treaty of I think it's called the Treaty of Verdun, that basically agrees a mutual offensive pact that both of them will team up against their brother.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. I'm like, that's from a military standpoint, you got 2 borders left and right to watch. It's not good. Yeah.
No. So a lot of the animosity to this very day between like the revanchist feelings between the French and the Germans around like Alsace-Lorraine that goes back over 1,000 years. It's all these like historic feelings of pain that have all been created by the backstabbing and the wars over these little territories that constantly like flip-flop.
Right.
And so the Crusades were finally waged that put a total end, and the trade routes that the
trade routes,
not the Knights Hospitalier, the Knights Templar. So the Knights Templar, as well as the Knights Hospitalier, Hospitalers, whatever. But then they're both 2 orders created around the same time. Both of them seem to have a direct continuity to the ancient Baphomet worshipping ceremonies of ancient Rome and even earlier. And that's partially why the French and the papacy eventually cracked down upon the Templars.
Yeah, the Templars, they were executed for blasphemy, and you weren't allowed to work in the Vatican if you were a Freemason or a Templar in any way.
Well, they also controlled the banking systems, right? Like they actually controlled they were the dominant banking centers of the world, were the Templar order. And the vast majority, 9 out of 10 Templars were not mercenaries. They were administrators of finance. And they were able to use that position. Also, they took control of the Radhanite trade routes along the Silk Road to become the new routes that were used to wage the Crusades. So the Templars had eventually got the testicles of the various leaders across Europe into a vice of constant debt and warfare. And that's where I don't know the full motive. I doubt that any, like, it's hard to find in this period like good guys. it's really like gangs in New York, like it's raw mafia, counter gang operations. But at a certain point, somebody decides they had enough, and it happens to be the French king and also the Pope. And the Knights Hospitaller, which becomes the Knights of the Temple of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem and the Order of Malta. These are the newer manifestations later on of the Knights Hospitaller, end up getting a lot of the possessions of the Templars, and the Templars kind of have to go underground, but they continue doing the same thing that they were always doing. They just did it now they just had a new base of operations in Scotland, a few other things. This becomes sort of the basis of the later revival of in the Masonic, or the pre-Masonic Rosicrucian order, which ends up taking control of the courts, of the intelligence services, especially of England. That then becomes the basis around which the later Royal Society of Britain is created, like the scientific society that Isaac Newton leads,
right? Which
is basically just a black magic occult secret society that then gives birth to the United Grand Lodge of Masonry in Britain. That's the central command of the Scottish Rite later on. So you have this sort of direct continuity of a lot of these things. And what they tried to do is destroy people's idea of, basically say that everything that they've been doing since the days of Babylon is what the Jews are. And the Jews became a very convenient hate absorber for everybody who had been burned by the oligarchy's machinations, which they still are to this day. That's why the Protocols of Zion were created by the Okhrana and British intelligence back in the late 1890s. They did it because that's always their go-to point. Everybody hates the Jews. And why? It's because like some of the Jewish families were convenient, useful tools in the time of, you had Pharaoh's Jews, so his preferred sort of house slave Jews would be used to then to do the banking operations, oftentimes very, very dirty work. In Rome, you had the same thing. A lot of the Roman higher up Jews weren't just tax collectors, but were also bankers for the empire. But they were ultimately kind of like what became known in the Middle Ages as the Hofjuden, the court Jews. They were more than happy to kill their own Jewish brethren in service to their master, as they were killing another ethnicity of Christians. They didn't care. They're ultimately, it's more satanic than anything else. And so when you did a really good job and you were consistent, you would be given like often a little mercenary dynasty for your kids and grandkids. And like the Bronfmans are a Canadian branch of one group that, did some good services to their overlords back in the early period of the Prohibition era. They were so good at it that they were granted a little hereditary dynasty, a little micro dynasty for Canada. But they're still not able to make their own decisions. The Rothschilds are slightly older, but even there, like Amschel came about, made his fame and fortune in the 1760s, 1750s. He was given a hereditary dynasty for his kids in various parts of Europe. Ultimately, still disposable but useful operatives for the upper level servants for the empire. There's a few other, and so, but the vast majority of the Jews were put into pogroms. So in Venice, that was the first nation in 960 that made laws that made it illegal for a Jew to access trade schools, to be part of a guild, to farm, to be allowed to enter military service, to travel on a boat. So ultimately, they created such confined regions that they're even like the idea of the ghetto came from Venice. That's the center of the satanic hive, as far as I could see in my analysis, has been centered in Venice. Venice is the key. And that's where the first ghetto was created. It's a Venetian term that they're only allowed to live in this one area. They're only allowed to do the trading of dirty cloth or banking services, financial services, money lending with interest. But that would be then used for their masters, who would want them to do that for the sake of economic warfare against other country or other rivals of Venice. And people who got burned, again, they started hating the Jews, and then it spread. So the Venetian anti-Jewish laws were then passed in Germany and Prussia and in England in the early 1000s and 11th century. And it became like a general thing. Everybody's going to hate the Jews and crack down on the Jews. The Romans had it earlier on. And the oligarchy loves it. They love it because it keeps people's minds away from the direct continuity of the ancient Babylonian mystery cults that gave birth to Lucifer and Satan, and that are the same ones in charge today under a new garb of scientism that is a cover for a still existent, directly continuous set of mystery cults.
The mystery cults. So what do you know about the times where they've been successfully purged or combated?
I would say for that one, and here let's round out our interview with this, because I've given people a lot to chew on. But for this particular one, I would say people should, if they can't afford my books, I encourage people who might be listening to this to go and buy The Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 1 to 4, because the whole thing is written around that, the attempt to answer that very question. What are all of the case studies that I could find throughout the last 3,000 years of observable history where the oligarchy was defeated in their machinations? That's the whole point. And it happens to be the case that a lot of the highest density defeats of the oligarchy's agenda and efforts came about with the American Revolution, and in dramatic efforts made that are heroic in the wake of the American Revolution, both in the USA especially, but also in Canada to a certain extent. Hence the Untold History of Canada book series as well. Goes through some of those stories that have been written out of our textbooks, and other nations as well. You'll find it in China. There's some amazing stories there. You'll find it in Russia, some amazing stories. I would say even the present age that we're living in right now is one of those stories unfolding currently, which I think the only parallel I see to the developments underway now are what I had seen with the Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Chinese alliance of the 8th century, 9th century around Charlemagne, Khazaria, Harun al-Rashid, and the Tang dynasty. I had not seen anything since then, even in that comes close to what I see now, emerging with these civilizational states, China, Russia, Iran, India. Now Syria is seeing like President Bashar al-Assad just came back to Damascus from a long visit in Beijing, very fruitful. Africa is going through a major Pan-African renaissance as well. That's something that is really giving me a lot of inspired hope.
Yeah, me too.
Especially with so I think that is something that will be written about in history books. Up until now, it's still a work in progress. There's problems. There's still deep state operations within a variety of these countries too that are trying to subvert the good from within China, within Russia, within India, within Iran. But overall, I see a really inspired fight. So, but yeah, buy my books. And if people can't afford the books for whatever reason, I get it. Like times are tough economically. Send me an email and I'll send you some free PDFs. Email Canadian Patriot 1776 at tutanota.com. TUTA Nota NOTA.com. Send me an email there. Ask for the PDFs. I'll send them to you.
That's Canadian Patriot 1776 at Tutanota.
Tutanota. It's a German encrypted email service that I use. Yeah.
TUTANOTA.com.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Matt, I love our conversations. I love the research you've done. I feel like you provide the citations for the breadcrumbs that I feel like I've discovered. And so I very much value our time together.
Well, Daryl, I got to say too, I really enjoy the reference point that you're coming at me from as well. Like you're bringing in a whole bunch of associations and lessons that you've gleaned from your time working within Silicon Valley, within the business sector that I don't have that experience. And I just appreciate also you sharing that, because I also have friends who, a lot of my friends, you know, they're communist and they tell me, you know, oh, there's nothing good from capitalism. It only causes destruction. I'm like, well, you know, there is a lot of destruction. That's true. But there's also this authentic, like healthy, creative, moral capitalism that you haven't discovered yet. And so just hearing you talking is an embodiment of the type of like good.
There was no civil war over indoor plumbing. People are like, that is fantastic. Sign me up for one. No one was like, no to toilets. They're the bane. No, like everybody was like, can you come to my house and give me a toilet? I would love that toilet. Yes, please. Can we, my bucket, this bucket just smells. I can't throw it very far from my door. You know, so there are genuine things that have improved everyone's livelihood. You know, I mean, obviously you can just look from the 1900s to now, we've doubled, tripled our lifespan. All the developments you mentioned, like America is such an anomaly where we really have to kind of protect that. Now you do have to be wary of monopolies. Freedom versus equality. If everyone's equal, no one is free. So there's no incentive to be a higher producer or to innovate. And if everyone is free, then no one is equal. And you can have generational inequalities, which doesn't necessarily do anyone good, because we've all had monopolies that, you know, monopolistic corporations we dealt with where we're just like, man, I wish I had an alternative. You know, like sitting on hold, dealing with terrible customer service reps and parasitic pricing programs. So, but I'm optimistic. I think if we can shake off these parasites, that a new golden era. Like I'm very optimistic. I forget Neil. I think his name is Neil something. He wrote the book The Fourth Turning. I saw he did an interview with Tony Robbins. They were talking about the cycles of civilization and that they typically take 20 to 30 years. There's like 6 generations, like flavors. Like if your parents coddled you too much, you grow up and be like, I'm not going to smother my kids. And then your kids grow up and they're like, my mom didn't hug me enough. And so it's like these 6 kind of like almost inevitable like personalities to generations in that. And then like a 4, like a summer, spring, summer, fall, winter. And that these cycles happen again and again and again. And that we're in one now. And his prediction was it's going to be about 2020, 2030, 2035 before we really kind of hammer out the details and come through whatever it is that we're going through right now. But that, you know, it's almost like there's 2 directions. One is we could enter a new dark ages if we don't handle it well, or we could have a new golden era. And I love some of the breakthroughs that we've seen this year. Even our original interview, I interviewed you. I interviewed Dr. Robert Malone before he was on big mainstream, Joe Rogan, all that. And I published them, and all of a sudden downloads for my podcast just like disappeared. It was like my podcasts ceased to be listed in places, which was really strange. And then that ended, you know, I'd say probably early 2022, perhaps. And then we've been building back up since. But it's just, I'm very optimistic. There's cracks in the dam. People are waking up. People are seeking out experts with you, like contrarian views compared to the mainstream. People are seeing, like, it's just the nuts are on the table, so to speak. Like, it's really hard. Like, they're trying to bring back COVID so bad, you know, and it's just, there's a lot of, like, the unvaccinated didn't die. Like, what's up with that? You know, like, there's just these things people can't ignore. And it's conversations like this between people like you and I that hopefully can be listened to hundreds and thousands, I think, are what we need more of, because it's the control of information now that I think is kind of, you know, I think this is the 5th generation warfare, and that a lot of it is social engineering and manipulation. And people, you know, there's all, I better wind this up because I could go on another tirade, but people don't believe or don't want to believe, like, we're all good people. And so it's hard for us to fathom what psychopaths would do, because we would never do that. You know, the story I like to use, I think it was Queen's University, I'm not sure, but I remember reading about a study on squirrels, and that if a squirrel had stolen buried food of another squirrel, when it was burying food, if a squirrel saw it burying it, it would finish it, leave, and then come back when that squirrel was gone and move it. But if a squirrel had never stolen food from another squirrel, they didn't care who saw them, because they couldn't imagine someone would steal. Like, I'm getting my food, I'm taking myself. I don't need to be worried about that. And it's this idea that since the general population are good-natured people, like Canada, I feel like Canada was just cannon fodder for psychopaths, because we're just like the hobbits of the planet. Like, if the world was Lord of the Rings, Canada would be the Hobbit, like the Shire, because we're all just like easygoing good people, and like we're known worldwide as the friendly people. But there's not a big difference. You have to be careful where kindness is weakness, you know, and it's just weaponized.
It's weird, right? Because it's like it's both. I agree with you on the Hobbit Canadian thing, and it's like it's this it's like a dual use weapon in a sense, because it can do a lot of great good or great bad. And you saw with the trucker convoy, there's like this
Right.
sort of natural salt of the earth innocence, which is so good and breathtaking when you just see people who are just good people, not big. They wasn't driven by some intellectual analysis of things, but it was like, this is wrong. My life is being threatened. I got to do something in peace. And it was done across Canada, and we saw the effect of it was gigantic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and the Hobbits did save the world, right? And at the end of the day,
right.
But at the same time, it does lack that needed Promethean spark of leadership, which you tended to see arise a lot more in the case of like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy. Like, there's a higher density of, and I say the Promethean character because I'm talking about the specific personality type which emerges occasionally. We're blessed if you get a Promethean figure once in a generation. I don't mean this because the Satanists have their own version of a perverse Promethean figure, and I don't mean that. I don't mean the defiant Lucifer that stood up to God. I don't mean that one. I'm talking about the actual Prometheus of Aeschylus, of Plato, but who stood up to Zeus from Aeschylus's story, and when Zeus said, fire shall not be granted to mankind, they must remain my playthings, living in caves forever. And Prometheus, the demigod, said, no, this is wrong. He stole fire after a drunken frenzy and orgy of which Zeus did every night, taught mankind how to use fire. And also, and Aeschylus is clear, it wasn't just fire, but also statecraft, animal husbandry, astronomy, the arts, like all of that. Fire is represented, and as a consequence, he was chained to a rock to have his liver eaten every night for 10,000 years by a vulture's punishment, which he could stop at any time by telling Zeus a certain story that Zeus wanted to hear, and he wouldn't do it, which is like Prometheus knew how Zeus was going to fall, was going to be destroyed, and he would refuse, because Prometheus means also foresight, and he refused to tell Zeus how he was going to go down, and chose to take the pain. And he's very clear that it's through the love of mankind that I'm able to do this. And this is what you saw with a lot of the founding fathers who risked their lives, who died to create this new potential for mankind. You saw it with like I said, you read the writings of Martin Luther King, who saw the promised land. He knew and he knew that he was likely going to be killed. And despite that, you could read his last or listen to his last speech on YouTube, and his From the Mountaintop speech. People should listen to that, actually. And you could see, like, that's Promethean. And we just don't have too many of them. We got a Papineau here and there. We got a Mackenzie from the 1830s. You know, we got a little element of it coming up now and again with, like, Premier Premier Johnson, the first, with who was a friend of Charles de Gaulle.
Yep.
You have maybe W.A.C. Bennett had an element of it, the premier of BC for 20 years. He was a nation builder, good guy. Still not the same intensity as the characters from the United States, but good people.
Right.
But we need more of that. So there, when you don't have that type of high quality leadership, you do run the danger of people who are easily emotionally exhausted, broken, and adaptable to systems of feudalism. And that's also a big danger for Canadians. So we got to sort of
I mean, there's a lot of people that want universal basic income and all these things. And I encourage people to just find their ikigai if they can, you know, that intersection between what you're passionate about, what people will pay for, and what you're good at, and try to serve the world. Because I had an early retirement. I retired early in my 30s, and I lasted about a week, 2 weeks. And I was just like, you just need more. You just need more. Like, just, you know, you go through all your vices and you do them, and then you're like, is this it? Like, this is it? And then you have to be aware of the vices taking over you. Like this, like it's real. The virtues and the vices are real. Like, you know, the seven deadly vices?
Sins.
Seven deadly sins.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry. Hadn't had my morning coffee yet. But like, they're real. And that's why I say some rule books are written in blood. You know, like, there's just some merit to some things. And I really do believe there is good and evil. And I'm really confident, and I'm just grateful you shared some time with us today to talk about this so we can get this message out to the world, because that's what we need. We need more discussions, more communications, less people being distracted, right? When you're I mean, it's the magician's trick. You're looking over here, you're so distracted, running the hamster wheel of making enough to pay your bills, to feed your kids, that you're not paying attention to what's happening over here. And some things, the wheels are so slow turning, people lack the mental fortitude to pay attention to it for that long, you know? And I mean, that's one of the things that the oligarchs have in their favor, is they think in terms of 100, 500-year plans, where most people are like, by Tuesday. And so that's, you know, and that's partially why they keep getting to push this agenda forward. And so thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate your time today. I do want to be respectful of it. So if people want to learn more, if they want to find out more, where can they get on touch? Where can they follow? Where should they, you know, plug in?
You can go to CanadianPatriot.org, risingtidefoundation.net. My Substack, MatthewEhret.substack.com. And also, I would say my wife and I were working with a collaborator who teamed up with us and has been helping us make very, very high-end video productions. So we've jumped into the documentary domain over the past year. We've just released something.
That's the Rising Tide YouTube channel?
Yeah, there's the Rising Tide Foundation YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, type in Rising Tide Foundation, you'll find it. There's the new video, a new 6-part series. Episode 1 is now out on escaping Calypso's Island by my wife. We're going to be doing something on the UFO psyop as well. Like, what's the direct continuity between the current effort to try to create a new modern drug-induced mystery initiation into a rebranded occult structure of pagan systems that we had contaminating the world pre and during the Christian era, and they're revamping that, but now with aliens that they've been working on bringing in for the past century, following the script of H.G. Wells. So that's going to be another several-part documentary series that we're also going to be releasing, the first one on Halloween, actually. So if people want to watch those, spread them, help us make them go viral. And also if people want to help us fund them, each one costs money. So we're always like fundraising. If you send me an email and ask me how to do that, and I'll tell you, because we definitely need citizen help to make that happen.
Right. Matt, thank you so much. Go check out CanadianPatriot.org. Go check out, what are the other ones?
RisingTideFoundation.net and Substack.
Matthew, thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Send in love, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Always a pleasure.